Wonderful, thank you. So I will be presenting data on U.S. students abroad. The information I will be presenting is based on our annual survey of U.S. higher education institutions, nearly 2,000 of them, who award credit for students going abroad. The time frame of the data come from the 2011-2012 academic year, which includes summer 2012. And as Alan mentioned earlier, the data from our study abroad survey lags 1 year behind the international students' data. And this is because we need to allow time for students to go abroad and then in the following year return home to their campuses and be awarded credit. We specifically collect data on U.S. students and permanent residents who go abroad. In 2011-2012, over 283,000 U.S. students received academic credit for study abroad. This was an increase of 3% over the prior year. And this is a slightly higher rate of increase than we saw in the previous year, which was only at about 1%. In terms of the top destinations, destinations of U.S. students are dominated by Western Europe. The UK, Italy, Spain, and France are the top 4 host destinations of U.S. students abroad. However, China is the 5th most popular destination for U.S. students. Looking now more broadly at regional trends, for U.S. students, the most popular region for study abroad is Europe. In 2011-2012, nearly 53% of U.S. students studied abroad in Europe. And this is a trend that we've seen lasting over time. However, in recent years, we've seen a greater diversification of study abroad destinations. And now, U.S. students account for 16% of U.S. students studied abroad in Latin America and the Caribbean, and 12% of study abroad students went to destinations in Asia. Turning now to look more specifically at top destinations for study abroad. Within Europe, the UK is the top host country of U.S. students abroad. And in this year, we saw the number of U.S. students going to the UK increase by 5%. And this was an additional 1,500 U.S. students who were in the UK as compared to the prior year. We also saw increase in study abroad to Ireland, which grew by 9%, and Denmark, which grew by 16%. Within Europe, we did see a large decline in students going to Greece. There were 21% fewer U.S. students in Greece than the prior year, and this was largely due to some political and safety concerns about travel to Greece. Some good news, Latin America and the Caribbean saw an increase of 12% in U.S. students studying abroad within the region. And this was driven by a wide variety of destinations within Latin America where we've seen increases in U.S. students studying abroad. Costa Rica, Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, these countries all saw a very large increase in U.S. students. And Peru, in particular, grew by 10% to enter the top 25 destinations list for the first time this year. There were 2 Latin American countries where we saw some declines. Mexico continued to decline by 8%, and this is due to some continuing safety concerns about travel to Mexico. The number of students in Chile also declined by 7%, and this is likely due to some student protests which began in Chile during this time period. The number of U.S. students traveling to Asia for study abroad grew 9% this year, and this was driven by continuing increases in study abroad to China, but also we've seen a great rebounding in the U.S. students who are traveling to Japan, which grew by 28%. And this is following the prior year's large declines because of the cancellation of many programs due to the earthquake and tsunami that had taken place in the prior year. Within Asia, we saw no declines among the top destinations in the Asian region. Each year, we conduct a fall snapshot survey of study abroad in conjunction with the Forum on Education Abroad. And in this survey, we survey U.S. higher education institutions to get a sense of some early trends that they're seeing in more recent study abroad numbers. Based on this year's responses of nearly 100 institutions, we see some early indicators that the increases to Japan and to China will continue. And we are also seeing some early indications that study abroad to the MENA region and to Europe will increase as well. There's also indications that the declines in study abroad to Mexico will continue in this year as well. So turning now to look at who the students are who go on study abroad, I'll first discuss the students' major fields of study. And what we've seen in the past several years is that the majority of students going on study abroad are students who major in the social sciences and in business. However, this year we also saw a large growth in students in the STEM fields who are studying abroad. In this year, there was a 10% growth in students in STEM fields going abroad, and collectively, the STEM fields now represent the second most popular field of study for study abroad students. One long-standing feature of U.S. study abroad is that the majority of students going abroad are female students. In 2011-2012, about 64% of U.S. study abroad students were women. Another long-standing feature of U.S. study abroad is the participation of students who identify as ethnic and racial minorities. And in 2011-2012, just 24% of all study abroad students were members of minority groups. And while we have seen an increase gradually over time in the participation rates of minority students in study abroad, we still have a ways to go. In all of U.S. higher education, the total enrollment of all U.S. higher education, there are 38% of students are minority students. So we can see that within study abroad, there's a disproportionate representation. However, what we do know is that targeted outreach and recruitment and funding opportunities can really go a long way to boost minority students' participation in study abroad. For example, the Gilman Scholarship Program, which specifically targets a diverse range of students, awarded about 54% of their scholarships to students who identify as racial and ethnic minorities. The majority of students who study abroad do so on short-term programs, and these are programs that last 8 weeks or less in duration or take place over the summer term. Only about 3% of all of U.S. study abroad takes place on long-term programs lasting an academic or a calendar year. Now, the numbers I've been speaking about relate to U.S. students who study abroad who are enrolled in U.S. higher education institutions, go abroad for short periods, and then return home to their U.S. campuses to complete their degrees. However, another aspect of U.S. students abroad that is not counted in our larger open doors number is those students who enroll directly in higher education institutions overseas. And we know that about 46,000 U.S. students are directly enrolling for full degree study within another country. Looking more closely at where these students go, the majority of students who are enrolling directly in overseas higher education institutions are traveling to the UK. In 2012, about 17,000 U.S. students enrolled directly in UK higher education institutions. And this is a number that has increased over the past 3 years. We've seen about an 8% growth in U.S. students enrolling in UK higher education. For other countries where we see U.S. students enrolling, the absolute numbers are certainly smaller than that of the UK, but there are a couple of countries I'd like to point out where we have seen some significant growth. Germany, in particular, we've seen a growth of 24% in students who are enrolling in German institutions, and as well, U.S. students enrolling in Chinese institutions has grown 46%. Another aspect of U.S. students abroad is that of non-credit education abroad. And we know that more and more students are seeking out non-credit opportunities, such as work, internships, and volunteering abroad. In a couple of years, we introduced a survey question within Open Doors to gather some data on these students. In 2011-2012, based on the responses of 213 institutions, we know that at least 12,000 students participated in non-credit education abroad. And again, this is above and beyond the larger Open Doors study abroad number. These students are seeking out such opportunities because they really value an international work experience that can help them prepare for their careers. And it can also be a helpful way to offset the costs for students going abroad. This number is definitely an undercount because for many institutions it is difficult to track the students who are going abroad and who are not receiving academic credit and maybe going abroad without their institution's participation. This number also does not include students engaging in research and fieldwork abroad, which we know for many graduate students in particular is a popular form of education abroad. So now I've been speaking about many different forms of U.S. students going abroad, and we have seen an increasing variety of different ways that U.S. students are pursuing their educational opportunities overseas. The vast majority of students are still traveling abroad and study abroad for academic credit, and this is our study abroad number of 283,000 U.S. students. Another 46,000 students are enrolling directly in international higher education institutions overseas. And we're still just starting to collect data on this aspect of education abroad, but we know that at least 12,000 U.S. students are pursuing non-credit opportunities overseas, which means that in 2011-2012, there were at least 341,000 U.S. students who were pursuing education overseas. Looking now at what we call the International Educational Exchange Balance, this is a comparison of the U.S. students who are traveling abroad for education in specific world regions compared to the international students we have here in the U.S. from those same world regions. And really what we see is that we have an imbalance. For most world regions, we have many more international students coming here to the U.S. than we do U.S. students traveling abroad. This is certainly the case for Asia, which we know is the largest sender of U.S. students, international students to the U.S. However, there is one region where this relationship is flipped, and that is Europe, where we send many more U.S. students to Europe than we receive U.S. students here in the U.S. And I'm also happy to report that for Latin America, this year we're starting to see an evening out of this balance. And this is driven by the increase in U.S. students traveling to Latin America.